Welcome our next guest, Alex Roy, the CEO of SalesboxAI. Alex, great to have you on the show. So for years, as we've talked about AI, it's a tech story, it's a business story, it's now becoming a finance story, but it's so much more than that. I mean, as we come out of the G7 here, it was a major topic. So how are we watching AI transform conversations, and not even just in a disruptive way, but in a transformative nature?
It's a great question. So what we are seeing is that AI is now critical infrastructure, you could term it. It is used to make decisions at scale. And, so that's the reason that it's not just software, but it's evolved into, making systems and, decisions at scale. So, so governments want to make sure that, it's regulated the right way. There are enough safety measures in place so that, there is we are able to make sure that the outcome of AI is positive, and there's no negative effects on it.
So are we witnessing a shift right now where we're going to see the AI leaders and the leadership in the space become as important as national competitiveness in energy and manufacturing or even in military strength?
So, as you're aware, the application of AI, especially the frontier models, is widespread. It can be applied. There are military applications to applications on the technology side, scientific advancement side. So yes, because these models can be used for multiple uses, the access to that, we will see that there is going to be restricted. It's going to be released probably in a restricted way to different regions.
So as we look at these multiple use cases for AI, we're also now increasingly seeing the management and executive teams at these AI companies sitting at the table with policymakers. I mean, how did AI labs become geopolitical players, I guess, for lack of a better term?
So, because it's critical infrastructure, and it's very important that we don't, it's great that you have both the government and the model builders working together to frame guidelines. And much of what the guidelines are created today is what's going to be codified into regulations. So, regulations take time. So it's good that it's being done in a collaborative way.
So you say they're working together to frame guidelines. So my question is then, are companies like OpenAI, Anthropic, Google, xAI now shaping policy rather than responding to it?
So I would say that they have a ringside view on, what's coming ahead. So governments are, it's very important for them to have that conversation with the model builders, the companies that you mentioned, so that they can stay ahead of it and make sure that there is a safe ecosystem built for, the infrastructure, the model providers, and the applications on top of it.
Do you have any concerns, Alex, about the level of influence that could be involved here? Because we're talking about the people who are building the infrastructure are in the room while the regulations and guidelines are being created and have this inside track. I mean, is there a concern here about how much impact this could have over entire economies, that they've got sort of a double, they're playing on both teams almost? This is a fast evolving space, and it's important that everyone collaborates in the ecosystem to shape rules of engagement, and so that their insights is helping in that, I would say. And you make an interesting argument here in the notes that you sent over that frontier AI is actually forcing governments to rethink what sovereignty is. What does sovereignty mean now in the context of AI as we have it existing in our current backdrop?
So, it's the duty of every government to make sure that they're in control of their own future. So from that perspective, being able to make sure that that the infrastructure on which it is run, the models that is run, they have some level of control and oversight is very important. And that's what, in different regions, governments are looking to do to build that ecosystem where, the models align with the regulations that they have for that region.
And how concerned right now are governments about becoming reliant on AI systems that were developed outside of their borders? Because Iron, this was a little bit more software, but also AI. But I remember seeing a headline earlier this week from Politico that France's national intelligence agency is no longer going to keep its deal with Palantir because they want to make sure that they have everything in their own EU ecosystem. So how important is that it be almost nationalized?
So there will be certain use cases, which is, as you rightly mentioned, for which you have that. There are specific models perhaps required for those use cases as well, that they would need. So, but there is still what looks like G7 is trying to build is an ecosystem where there are multiple partners, and so that's good from a market perspective. That there are going to be there is going to be certain competitive advantage for the vendors in the infrastructure space today.
And as we look at this AI race and a lot of the conversation around AI is tied to these exports and chips particularly, as we look at export controls, it's become a major tool in the AI race and who's being successful. I mean, we certainly watched NVIDIA take a massive hit when they could no longer export to China. How are restrictions on things like chips and model usage and AI technologies reshaping how we view global competition?
So, see, whenever a new model is released, it's important that it kind of gives capabilities to both good and bad actors, in the world. So having a way to be able to restrict, the usage of that gives governments control on making sure that it's a safer environment for everyone involved. So having that ability, we would see that the pace at which these models are evolving, that the latest model perhaps is going to be released in different regions at made available at a different time.
And you keep highlighting different regions and different availabilities, and a lot of that because of regulation. Coming out of the G7 and this AI framework here, are we moving, in your viewpoint, toward a more universally accepted approach to AI, or are we moving more towards a fragmented one where we're going to start to see different regions operating under different tech stacks and under different regulatory frameworks? I mean, what's the end goal here?
Yeah, I mean, we should view it as ecosystems that are developing, and each ecosystem would have nuances to it. So, for example, there is a U.S.-led ecosystem that's shaping up, and you have something in Europe, which is very very specific to Europe regulations. You have China building an ecosystem separate from it. So what we are going to see is, and there would be certain amount of interoperability between them. So you are talking about innovation happening in parallel, and there's learnings that that carries across from one ecosystem to the other.
And Alex, we're running tight on time here. So for my last question, what do you think the most important takeaway from the discussions around AI was that came out of the G7?
I would say, from a market perspective, the concept of a trusted network or trusted ecosystem, that's being worked upon. So what that means is, there's going to be, they're trying to build an environment and guidelines that allows the infrastructure providers, the government, and the governments and the model builders to coexist and work within certain guidelines.
And I'm going to throw one more in here, one more follow-up there. The G7 continues to emphasize that all of this participation is voluntary here. And you keep talking about and working within the regulations. Is that enough to be a voluntary participant, or are we going to move to a point where we have formal global regulation?
So, I think the best analogy is like aviation. You have regulations at different level. There's a global level regulation. You have something national and then local as well. So coming back to your question, what would happen is that, these, it would depend on, it would actually depend on the regulations which is there.
Alex, really appreciate you lending your expertise to the show today and taking a closer look at the G7 and the role that AI played, the surprisingly important role AI played in the discussion this year. Alex Roy, CEO of SalesboxAI, coming